Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 200th episode of Eating at a Meeting, live and audio only. And I am blown away that I started this show 3 years ago at the start of the pandemic in the middle of a Facebook group, and to educate or to get people in my Facebook group chatting with each other, I started doing these Facebook Lives. And what it has turned out to be is now 200 episodes of conversations that I've had with amazing people from all over the world about what food and beverage means to them and how to create safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences. I'm excited to have my very first guest on the show join me today, Aaron Malwer, and some others. There's a total of 18 that will be joining me today, and we're going to be talking about, in different segments, safety, sustainability, and inclusion. Those are the conversations that I have around what eating at a meeting is. And so I did ask them all before we got on the show to answer a question of what the state of food and beverage is for them, and using 3 different words to describe that. And throughout the whole conversation today, we're going to fill the whole hour up. Words like over-ordering, education, manageable, necessary, awareness, collaboration, frustration, and that food is relevant, protracted compliance, which creates uncertainty. So lots of different words in here that we're going to talk about, but I'm happy to bring everybody in here now. So first is my very first guest ever. I'm going to introduce her now, is Erin Malwer. She is the CEO and Executive Director of Allergy Strong. And then we've got Alan Kleinfeld, who is a safety expert from the meetings industry that I've known for quite a few years. And then we have got Dave Bloom, who is the CEO of Snack Safely, a great source for food allergy information. Elise Bullisbach, who is a student at American University studying political science with the hope to creating systematic change around celiac disease and food allergies. Smart young lady here. Heather Landix is joining us from the other side of the pond, and she is a experienced food safety auditor from the UK, now living in Denmark. We've got Moly Crouch here, who is with Sodexo Live, and she's the corporate director of sustainability for that organization. Doreen Cumberford, she is a friend that I met in a writing group. She is an author and a speaker on where did I have that there? Who helps expats and global nomads grow their work-life balance. But she really talks about culture and how to incorporate culture, and that includes the food. And then also here right now is Chef Carla Ortiz. She is from Puerto Rico. She's a vegan chef and has her own restaurant in a food hall. So hello, everybody.
Hello, Tracy.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, 200.
200, yes. Woohoo! I'm so excited to have everybody here. And I wanted to kick off the conversation, and everybody brings a different perspective on this in a variety of different ways, and want to talk about safety. And what does that mean? And safety comes in a variety of different forms. Alan's a former police officer, and so he has that perspective, but I think he brings a lot of perspective on looking at safety and a meeting planning perspective. But the rest of you, and Doreen, safety wise, you want to feel safe where you are in wherever you are, right? And that includes in the food. And you've had some experiences since you live in Mexico now and coming back to the States for visits. But otherwise, everyone is also food allergy in the food allergy realm here and food safety. So my first question is, what does safety look like to you right now in the food and beverage world? Erin, do you want to kick that off?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple of things. One is I think it looks like transparency for those with food allergies. It looks like good labeling practices. It looks like understanding what you're putting into your body. And I think that goes as much for those with food allergies who absolutely have to monitor that for their own immediate risk, as well as just simply health conscious for other reasons. We want to know what we're putting in our bodies, and it's really important that the food labels reflect that so we can make good choices.
Yeah, and food labels on prepackaged and prepackaged food and unpackaged food across the board.
Absolutely. And a minimum access to that kind of information. So It's important that there's somebody at every either event, restaurant, any service space that is knowledgeable on that information so that when a question is asked, that information can be pulled up quickly and readily and accurately.
Yeah, exactly. Elise, coming at it from a school perspective and what you did, I know you we'll tell everybody you worked at FAIR, which is the Food Allergy Research Education Organization, but you testified on, and Erin, you have too, you've testified on Capitol Hill as a person with celiac and food allergies. What do you think about safety right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think safety, it has so many pieces in it. And I agree with everything Erin just said about how it's about inclusivity. It's about how transparent we are. And I think transparency is important, not just as someone with food allergies, but I always think about it's actually important to everybody. Understanding what we put in our body is how we sustain ourselves. It's how we fuel ourselves. And so whether you have food allergies or celiac disease, you're vegetarian, you're vegan, you'll have an autoimmune disorder. Like, this community isn't just the 32 million Americans with food allergies. It's not just the 1% of Americans with celiac disease. It is a vast group of people who care about what they put in their body. And so to me, safety and knowledge about our food, it's so much more intrinsic than just this group with disabilities, but it's really inherent to how we eat and engage. So I think with safety, it's a bigger picture than just, am I going to live to tell the tale of this meal, but about like, how do we consider what we put in our bodies?
Very true. And Carla, since you just hopped in here and you're a vegan chef, and I think what Elise just said is people wanting to know what they're putting into their bodies, and you get your food directly downstairs from some of your farmers there. How is it important as a vegan chef for that transparency and safety?
It's been a tedious task because some of these people are not well equipped with all the information that they need in order to have the right balance with their food source. Now we can get into so many other things, and me as a chef over here, I try to keep it seasonal and as balanced as I can without using any of maybe some sort of product that has been modified in any way, shape, or form. So I don't use things that I consider harmful to the consumption of my clients. So processed or no. So keeping it that simple has so many challenges. People still don't understand where their protein comes, if they're vegan or if they're having enough of their carbs. And then we have to transition into, okay, I cook the food, but I have to know what I'm cooking before I serve it. And that's a challenge. Not everybody is ready also for that's true when it comes to our food. And that's what keeps it a little bit taboo when you speak about having these sort of options available for people who want to transition to veganism or eat healthier.
Right. Very, really important. Moly, coming from the perspective of a food service provider, and we were having this conversation just before we got online, is like, I've been to a hotel, and it's happened to me twice recently, is that a chef says, well, I make the food, but I don't label it. And you mentioned something about communication, and I think everything what the three of them just said too is about that communication. How do we, from a food service provider who's focused on, and your role is sustainability, and I think sustainability includes safety. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so to me, and congratulations first, let me say that, because I'm so excited for you. To me, safety is a variety of things, right? It's not just necessarily the safety of the food, of course, which we're talking about today, but safety of the guests and safety of the environment itself, because we're in a lot of large buildings, and we certainly want to be as safe as we can. But I think communication is key. I think more descriptive menus would help. I understand that we don't necessarily want to be as descriptive as we can to allow the chef to have some creativity, right? To go, oh, I want to put this kind of sauce on it versus this kind of sauce.
But when we're selling to the masses and we're selling to large groups and even the smaller groups, restaurants are better about it, certainly because it's easier for them to do. There's not as many people in between that menu and the consumer as there are sometimes within a corporate environment. So I think just getting those ingredients out, I'm not saying it has to go all the way down to the salt and the pepper. I think everybody understands there's pantry items, so to speak. But pantry items are also, if you're including an almond paste as part of your pantry item in a bakery, that's not a pantry item. And so I think the understanding of what that is understandable. To me, garlic salt is a pantry item, but there's also people that are allergic to garlic. Right? So there's a lot of specifics about that. And I think just for chefs to have a better understanding, because they go to school, they are taught a variety of things. A lot of it is geared towards food cost and and how they're going to make money and what their menu is going to look like and how they can actually turn a profit. But I think the other flip side of that needs to be, we finally got them to think about waste and think about compost and think about doing the right thing with what they're doing with their trim. But again, we talk that to them under the food cost guide. So, hey, if you've got this much leftover trim, then clearly you're losing some money out there on the table. And so we just need to turn that around to the ingredients a little bit stronger. And then I think, honestly, there needs to be more discussions. We have BEO meetings on a weekly basis, and there's no reason we can't go down these items and go, Chef, you always have chicken Dijonnaise on here. I've never really understood what's in the chicken Dijonnaise. Can you explain it to me? And if not, go to the kitchen and go, what day are you going to be preparing the Dijonnaise? I'd like to come out and see. And then you'll just see the ingredients on the table and talk to the chefs that are actually cooking the food. Because the ones that are cooking the food know exactly what's going in it. But those are the ones that are not out there serving the food typically.
Right. Very, really good point. All right, Dave, since you've got snack safely right behind your head, and that's kind of ties right into what you do too, is understanding the labeling laws and how we do that and reporting when those things don't happen correctly. So can you talk about what safety means to you?
Oh, sure. Well, food labeling in the United States is frightening. There are so many loopholes, and primarily the big loophole that we have is precautionary allergen labeling. You might see it as PAL. The problem is that warnings like may contain traces of and manufactured on equipment that also processes some allergen. They're entirely voluntary. And the problem is you can't rely on them. So if you see something like may contain peanuts, that's a good cue to tell you that peanuts might be in the product, and if you have a peanut allergy, to avoid it. But if it doesn't have that statement, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything, and that's unfortunate. And a perfect example is last week or a couple of weeks ago, Mondelez, who make they issued a recall for a few of their Belvita sandwich cookies. Delicious. But aside from that, they had introduced somehow peanuts into the product. Why? Because the product, the non-peanut containing product, is made on the same line as the peanut containing product. Did they warn for that on their labels? No. So there's an example of a very big manufacturer that does not voluntarily label for allergens that are made on the same equipment. Right. And it came back to bite them. So it's really a frightening state of affairs right now, and it needs to be addressed.
It totally does. And that brings me to Heather and Carolyn, who are on the other side of the pond from us. And I want to, because when you're doing, we were talking before the show as well on that may contain statement, because somebody was doing it at a hotel, may contain nuts, and putting it on a buffet. Like, you could say that about every single ingredient that you have in your kitchen pantry, right? So I want to understand, Heather and Carolyn, who both do kind of audits of venues and restaurants, and how do we manage that, the manufacturing side of it and the service side of it, in managing that may contain statement?
I think it's quite difficult for hospitality businesses. I recently went to a conference in April. I went to have my lunch, and I'm gluten and dairy free. And they were aware that I was gluten and dairy free. And the matrix they had was a may contains for gluten and nuts, not even peanuts, but nuts. After having a conversation with one of the servers, well, gluten's airborne, isn't it? Nuts are airborne. And I'm like, not quite the way you should be doing it and dealing with it. I sort of had the conversation, were there nuts in the kitchen? Were there nuts on anything that were there? And there weren't. So to use that statement, but you're probably all aware of the Celia Marsh case as well. the Celia Marshall Pret-a-Manger, she purchased a vegan wrap, and we all know now that vegan does not mean free from, and I know Heather's very keen to put that out there as well, as we all are with our training. So the wrap was, or the yogurt that was provided by Chaoti, came via, they had a product in it called HS1, which was provided by Tate & Lyle, or produced by Tate & Lyle, an Australian company. And in Australia, when they produced that company, there was no may contains. It was made on a pure line of just no dairy. Obviously, they came to the UK. They produced this HS1 product, which was the stabilizer in the UK, but the factory had it on the same line as milk powder. They actually labelled quite clearly on the product when they provided it to Chaoti, but Chaoti were thinking, well, I've asked for a dairy-free product, I've asked for it to be vegan. They basically took that to ignore it. They ignored that may contains. When it was tested afterwards, Celia Marsh tragically died, and there were lessons learned afterwards. But when they tested the product that came off that line, 30% of them contained milk. So again, what you were saying, Dave, the may contains in England is voluntary still at the moment. We're not moving away from that at the moment, but there is a lot of work being done by the government, the Peace Standard Agency with may contains. Still got a way to go where people are ignoring it. I know a hotel chain, again, that I stayed at, 3 of them. It was only on the 3rd hotel I stayed in that I realised on their menu disclaimer, or the form at the bit at the beginning, we do not label any of our may contains products across onto our menu. And I'm like, why aren't you doing that? You're a major chain. And I didn't know about it until the 3rd place I went to, because the first 2 were good communicators, so I thought, because they told me about what they could do, what they couldn't do, and check stuff. But by the 3rd one, it wasn't so great. And it's like, actually, no one's told me that you're not putting may contain. So if I have an allergy, I don't know. It's very difficult. I know that obviously Heather, she's got a lot with may contains as well, and vegan versus free from.
Yeah.
I can just jump in at that point, especially about Celia, who died. And the problem is as well from the consumer perspective. So I always emphasize communication's your best safety device, as well as what Dave said, because when you use a may contain, there is no quantity associated with how likely is it to contain, or how much is it likely to contain. And so actually in the UK, a lot of manufacturers put it on there even if there's a very remote risk, so it's overused. And then the consumer thinks, oh, it's just got the may contain legal jargon on there, so it's actually dismissed. There's a lot of people, there's a recent Guardian article, which is like the independent, supposedly independent newspaper in the UK, and it's talking about a boy that died, and he died from an allergy, and he'd had a may contain biscuit the day he died. And they're like, was it the may contain? They couldn't actually find the cause of his death. But as a parent of someone with allergies, they're still using may contains. They're taking that risk. So there's a lot of consumers see these waivers and disclaimers. I actually have really focused on how to write an appropriate disclaimer, because they're thinking that it's waiving their responsibilities. So if they put a disclaimer on a menu, for example, they might take no care in preparing that allergy-friendly dish. So if you do prepare, in the UK, if you prepare someone an allergy-friendly dish, so you've accepted they have an allergy, they've actually told you, they might not tell you, they might just assume by reading the menu. So they've actually told you they have an allergy, and if you then serve them, legally you're supposed to provide them with a free-from menu. But the difference between not having a may contain on there and having a free-from claim on there isn't widely understood, even by manufacturers. So they shy away from having no may contains because they think that means free-from.
Right.
And there is a risk, there's so little guidance on how to do that. And the risk assessment basically says, if you don't have it in the factory, that's fine. But Tracy, you mentioned, what does the hotel do that they've got all of these items in their kitchen? But also they're manufacturers. So their manufacturers might have a may contain on there. So they don't have almond in their kitchen, but their manufacturer does. So it gets so complicated that the consumer, this communication and accuracy thing, again, the consumer can't make their own risk assessment for themselves, depending on how severe, if they're on this level where it's an intolerance. They've even tried to redefine what an allergy is into sensitivities and hypersensitivities, because the overlap's so huge. It's not just a life or death thing. I might be put in bed for several days if someone feeds me something I'm not technically an IgE response to, but I'm severely intolerant to. That's the problem for consumers in this sort of triple overlaid conundrum.
All right. So, Alan, as a former police officer and a safety expert for meetings and events, how do planners manage this? I mean, because you're also a meeting planner as well. I mean, so am I. But how do we manage this with our hotels? And I mean, because we can't delve into who all their manufacturers are, et cetera. But and Molly, you said too, it's a lack of communication from one to the other, from the back of the house to the front of the house. How do we manage that?
So from the meeting standpoint, I think it's a little different than an individual standpoint because you have a little bit more input in what your attendees are going to eat. So it is about, like what Aaron said, transparency. So from the planner, be transparent up front, maybe even at contract negotiation stage or before that you're going to write in the contract, all food will be labeled. The point of that is to indicate to the venue or the supplier just how important this issue is. From some of my groups, like, we need to know that your hotel staff knows CPR and can get access to a defibrillator because of the demographics of our attendees. Same thing with this. It's going to be communication and evolution over time involving the meeting planner, the kitchen staff, and then the person who might be that liaison between you and the kitchen staff, like the convention services manager. I think one of the challenges we have is that a lot of hotels, and maybe it happens with a lot of planners, they don't think this is an issue because no one brings it to them. So if the planners show it as an issue from the very beginning with any other safety concerns, then the venue knows that this is something that you take seriously and that they should follow. And then the other thing is, one of the things that I put on my site visit checklist is not just allergies that attendees might have, but is the hotel staff trained to deal with a reaction? Is the kitchen being maintained? Is it clean? Is it meeting all the regulations it needs to meet? And are they preventing any contamination? It might even get to a point, if it's something for your group that you're serious enough about, you asked about air circulation and how often that stuff worked into food and beverage. So it is communication between all parties, showing that it's something that is important to you, and then making sure back of house is also meeting the requirements that it needs to meet in order to produce F&B that your attendees will enjoy and remember.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So Doreen, when we're talking about safety here, and you talk about, and this is going to tie into the next conversation of inclusion as well, is that you're an expert on reclaiming or feeling comfortable in spaces, right? You're an expat or coming back into a country. So what thoughts do you have on this?
I think that we are all, to a certain extent, a bit of victims in how big our systems have become. The international supply chain, the possibility of inclusion and travel and diversity, all got a bit shaken up by good old COVID. And I answered your question, Tracy, with the word tenuous, because I've been in the States, back in the US, and it just feels a little uncertain. When I go to a restaurant, I sense that the wait staff are a bit nervous, and that's a generational communication piece. But I also think they're not well trained. They don't feel secure. They're not absolutely certain what is in a dish, and they are afraid to be held responsible for what they're serving. And so I think we need to revisit food, and each of us needs to be re-educated on taking responsibility and accountability and building a better world, because food is one of the central concepts of cultural being.
Yep. And that's really important because food really does connect us. And Heather, while you were chatting, made this comment. Food allergies and intolerances are on the increase, that 20% want information about ingredients and contamination. And I think with what we do, communication is huge, and wait staff is the biggest challenge right now, right? And getting them to be trained, like you said, and understanding that.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in because I do run a scratch kitchen, which means it's very inclusive for anybody who wants to come in. And I select my agricultures and farmers very well, try to keep it as local as I can. And I cannot tell you how many times my staff is very well trained. We ask the customers if they have any intolerances, allergies, or sensitivities to anything. And 8 out of 10 times, food will come back because the person who ordered the food didn't tell us completely what was going on. So we cannot just responsibilize the wait staff. Also, the customer that comes in does have a duty to themselves to announce that they have some sort of preference or allergies, specifically allergies, which I work with a lot, or any type of condition. So it's really hard on the end as well when you do have a restaurant that is to cater this type of public and they still do not comply. And it's not all of them, but most people do, or they are on a gluten-free diet, but they don't have any type of allergy. So when we do work with any type of allergens, we do tell the customer, we're going to take a little longer for you so we can clear out the area so you can have a good dining experience. And then they'll tell me, oh, it's not really an allergy or an intolerance, it's just something else. When you have all this inclusivity and spaces like this, it's also a little off-putting to have to deal with people who don't really have the allergy, who have a lifestyle, and I'm fine to cater with it, but just have that transparency because it's money that we do lose every time we have to redo a plate where somebody doesn't come forth with their full allergy list. It's like at least when you come eat here, it's like a little mini interview. Let me know about you. What can you eat? And that way I can cook for you. And it's been back and forth I've been here 6 years, and it's something that hasn't changed. The education with the customer, also having that freedom to tell the restaurant they're eating in, this is what's going on, but I want to eat here. What can you do for me? And then have this space like I have that it's willing to do all this work.
Right. And it does come down a lot, and Sarah, we're going to bring you in here in a second, come down to understanding what's in it. And you're a scratch kitchen and a big, huge hotel or a Moly, like your convention center can't do scratch kitchen 100% of the time, right? At the Orange, but these huge convention centers. So it really does make it important, going back to what Dave says and Aaron on the prepackaged food and understanding those labeling. And if it says made in a facility or there's cover your ass statements, excuse my language, CYA statements, right? But Sarah, you're a manufacturer as well as the food allergy mom. Safety wise in this conversation, where does that come into play? And just to bring this into the play too, because I know we're going to talk about it, is the food code. So in 2014, I'm just going to jump back a little bit, the EU instituted EU 1169, which required food, unpackaged food, so free food at a buffet at a hotel or at the Quick Trip to be labeled or have the information readily available on allergens. The U.S. just made that change on our food code in December. Yep. But just as the EU, every state has the ability to do what it wants with that food code. So Sarah, can you talk about that as a manufacturer?
So hi guys, I'm Sarah from Hungry Harry's. That's okay. We have allergy-friendly baking mixes free of the top 14 allergens. So I'm talking about the food code. So it was the 28th of December. It was right at the end of the year. So it was sent out as a release. There are significant changes. There are 3 areas. The first is sesame. The second is labeling requirement. And the third is the training requirement. And I think the second and the third impact us as much as the first. And I understand, Erin, you may have had a quick conversation about sesame a little bit earlier on. So we know sesame, nice allergen. We've gone across that. With reference to the food labeling, when you go and you buy those bulk products, so you just go and you use Whole Foods, you use the bin, you open the lever, you put it into a bag or a clamshell, and then you buy your oats. Well, all of those now have to be independently labeled, whether they have any of the top 9 allergens, where they're manufactured, all of the details. No longer can you just go and buy an ingredient in a packet. Everything has to be labeled. So understand the layer of complexity that adds to a supermarket chain. I wouldn't be surprised if we found that most of those bulk buy scenarios started to phase out. But as Tracy said, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It is very much state-based. In reference to training, and this is the bit that I love, because the more we train, the more we make sure that just in case a piece of protocol has gone astray, but we have somebody who's aware, we kind of reduce the chance of those kind of situations. The food code literally refers to, it's section 2-103-11. How nerdy is that? So I know that. And I have to give a shout out to Craig from, he is my guru when it comes to So I will go back to my sheet. I know, so nerdy. Yeah, food allergy nerd. I love it. So employees properly train in food safety, including food allergy awareness as it relates to their assigned duties. Food allergy awareness includes describing food identified as major food allergens and the symptoms that a major food allergen could cause in a sensitive individual who has an allergic reaction. Yay. So they're basically saying they've got to know the allergens, they've got to know what an anaphylaxis looks like. And now the next step is to understand and get them trained on how you treat an anaphylaxis. And that's another project I'm working on.
I mean, it's going to be a challenge in a lot of the places that we have because of the staffing or lack of staffing, and because of different timing of that. Nina, I just brought Nina Curtis in. She's an executive director and executive chef at Plantish and Company.
Good morning.
Good morning. And being in that back of the house and that being that chef, how do we manage what Sarah just said when we're looking at catered functions and not just in a restaurant, right? Can we do it?
Well, I don't think it's any different than what we do in the kitchen. The kitchen is our standard. So whether the food is going out in the dining hall or your cafe or restaurant, or it's going out for catering, the standards should be the same. They are for me, and they have been anywhere I worked. And it really heard earlier, Chef Carla, was it talking about, yes, we need to know what is coming in because there's a lot of planning that takes place. And I'm also a plant-based chef. I also have a scratch kitchen to the degree that we can have scratch. I also have a budget. There are a lot of things that come into play. So I'm sure everyone here, we have to plan out. We have to know what events are coming in for catering. We have to know the number of people. And that in the catering segment, sometimes everyone's not as great as you, Tracy, or others that do this. And there are a lot of changes that take place. And when we have to make more changes, that's more dollars. So first of all, I think there's a standard that has to be set in the kitchen, first off. The kitchen has to be clean. I mean, there's always that thought. You should be able to eat off the floor. That's a health department.
There's probably places you can't do that.
No, I'm saying that, but that should be the mentality and the baseline for everyone. I know it's not. I've walked into a lot of kitchens. Sometimes it's Russian roulette, but I'll leave that alone. But it is the health department of the county that we are in that is regulating these things. And since 2020, things have gotten a lot tighter, rightfully so. They should have always been that way, but it's interesting to watch. So to answer your question, standards are important, and then standards set the pace and tone no matter how the food is being served out. Even if the food is going outside of your facility to be delivered to a facility for catering or on your premises, it should all be seamless across the board.
So how do we get, and Erin and Sarah brought this up, and I'm going to relate it back to chefs, but Erin brought up the companies that are purposely adding sesame to their mixes, right? So they can get away with not having to clean their equipment to avoid the sesame allergy, but also the chefs that say, hey, I make the food, I don't have to label it, and have that disconnect from the responsibility of doing that.
Yeah, I don't have answers for the kitchen, but I can talk about the Fast Track, at least on the manufacturing side, and where the responsibility is turning. And unfortunately, it's turning back to the individual patient, and it's become incredibly difficult. And so I know it complicates things down the line for all the service industry suppliers that are out there and everyone in that industry serving patients, clients to you and food allergy patients to us. The FAST Act is the Food Allergy Safety, Treatment, Education, and Research Act that was passed in 2021. It was enacted in January 1st of this year. And what it says is that sesame was designated as a major allergen to be labeled by its common name. Prior to this, sesame was often hidden in products under uncommon names, things like tahini, which to everyone in the food industry, you guys know that sesame paste. But to a lot of people, they don't know that, or under general terms like spices or flavoring. So if you had a sesame allergy, it was very difficult to determine based on an ingredient label whether a food was safe for you or not. Now in 2023, it has to say sesame. But fortunately, The baking industry has decided that this is too much of a liability for them. So back to whose responsibility is it and what they're doing. And so baking industry almost universally has begun adding a little bit of sesame flour to their products. So previously safe products are now unsafe. And they're now unsafe in a really powerful way, which is that whole sesame seeds are actually less allergenic. They're slightly safer for you, if that's a word I could even possibly use, but they're less allergenic than when it's ground up or made into a paste or an oil. So they're adding sesame flour, which is they're adding a more potent, a more toxic form of sesame to a product in a small amount. And then the unintended consequences of this are that they're doing this to comply with cleaning and the FSMA, which is the Food Safety Modernization Act. They say they're complying. I have some beef with that personally. However, the problem here, of course, is that we're seeing people who have a sesame allergy who are reaching for familiar products that they have deemed safe in the past that now silently contain sesame. And we are seeing the reactions from this skyrocket. They have gone up since January in a marked way. We are keeping track of these. And unfortunately, this has become a pretty dangerous situation. And so where's the fix, right?
One of the real issues is these bakeries are all over the United States, and they serve schools, hospitals.
Right.
They serve everyone. So what about the kid who's sitting at lunch? He's had the same sandwich every day. Now suddenly the company is adding trace amounts of sesame. Was this kid ever warned? Was his family ever warned? So it's problems like that happen downstream.
And just as importantly, we're back to sort of the conversation we just had, which is, were the cafeteria workers warned? Were the food service workers warned at the restaurants that are now serving bread that contains sesame that didn't previously contain sesame? Where the buns were safe and now the buns are not safe? And so we as customers may be asking the right questions. They as servers may be answering to the best of their knowledge, but they may not be updated based on a supplier that this is happening at the supplier level. So it's affecting whole systems. It's not just affecting the 1.5 million people with sesame allergy. It's not just affecting their families. So times 4, the 6 million people that are directly affected by sesame allergy. It's affecting whole communities of people, like whole school systems. And I would be remiss if I didn't say this worries me on a level, great concern. Like I lose sleep over the fact that we have very vulnerable populations that rely on free lunches, weekend backpack programs. Look at the summer lunch program that happens and breakfast programs that rely on these things that are having their intake cut in half or less based on these things. Right. So it becomes a real problem.
I'm going to jump in, Erin, because you asked, like, what's the solution? And I think, like, coming from the legislative side, that's a really interesting question, because working with Representative Matsui and Nick Henry on the House side, who are the lead sponsors on the FASTER Act, they're really struggling. Like, how do you enforce the FASTER Act and create this safe environment? Because obviously the law has this intent, and while manufacturers are not following the spirit of the law, the intent of the law, they are following the letter. And so it creates an interesting dilemma where, as you start to go through this enforcement methods, where are you supported by the law and where can you adapt it and change it? And so it creates a really interesting dilemma on the legislative side. And the other thing I would throw out there is that you mentioned, like, these vulnerable communities and the training for staffers. And that's another interesting piece with food allergy training. And there's a bill in the Senate right now, the Protecting Children with Food Allergies Act, introduced by Senators Durbin and Duckworth of Illinois. And essentially it proposes increasing training requirements for WIC workers and frontline cafeteria workers who are working with these vulnerable populations with food allergies, so that they have access to information about allergens, access to training information on how to respond to allergies, and to create a safer place. Because as you said, Erin, like, it's so important that the staff is trained. It's so important that people with food allergies, especially low income and communities of color with food allergies, which we see are disproportionately impacted. So it really is, like, such a connecting ecosystem, but there are some cool pieces of legislation that are trying to, like, attack these problems almost one at a time.
Yes, we're so excited for the future of this because of this young lady.
Exactly.
Yes. And we need to, unfortunately, I've got a couple more people that are in this screen here that I want to pull in here, because I do want to talk about safety as it relates to alcohol and inclusion, and then also with sustainability. So thank you all so much. And I want to pull in Kate Faulkner and Kayla King Kayla's actually in that allergy celiac world as well, but with My Meal, and Kate is with Zero Proof Collective. I just want to talk the safety aspect, Kayla, because you're in the celiac food allergy world, and I know you just went to Italy. So just bring that in really quickly, if you can, succinctly, of where you, as an owner here in the States of a labeling company, comparing Europe to the States, what you found.
I think generalizing Europe is a little hard because like each country is very different. But Italy in particular, when it comes to celiac disease, the Italian Celiac Association has a really great program that works with restaurants to help the community find safe places. And in regards to other food allergies, a lot of these celiac safe restaurants have an increased level of awareness of how cross-contact works. And therefore, they do have labeling on their menus, and they are informed about proper training and procedures around that. So going to Italy was definitely really interesting. That was my third time there. And so because the Italian Celiac Association has an app similar to what I'm trying to build in the States with My Meal, where you can see what restaurants are safe for you, see how they're trained. And when you go to them, a lot of them do have separate kitchens. They have to go through a training program. So they just do have that increased level of awareness. Now in the States, it's an interesting dynamic because it's super hit or miss. So with a lot of scratch kitchens or higher end restaurants, there definitely is an increased level of awareness. But that is because the chef or the staff there has really made a commitment to train their staff, make sure their staff knows the ingredients, and provide that higher level of service to people. But it's a mixed bag because it's basically dependent on what the restaurant wants to do. And I talked to a restaurant owner in Italy and I was like, hey, why are so many people here interested in participating in this program? And he had mentioned that because there's just such a high rate of celiacs, that a lot of like restaurant owners that are doing this have celiac themselves. Their family member has celiac themselves, so they have some kind of personal connection to it. And while that does absolutely happen into the US, because like a bunch of the restaurants that we work with for My Meal, they do have some level of personal connection to that issue. It's for the people that don't have any personal connection, I do find a lot of times that there is such a gap in awareness, and they take the approach sometimes of more of like, instead of educating, they go to the side of, hey, we don't want to be liable. Like, it doesn't matter how much money this community brings us in. We just don't want to have to deal with that. I totally respect that and would rather have somebody say, hey, we can't do this, than try and serve somebody that they don't feel comfortable serving. So the dynamic between particularly Italy and the US is definitely super interesting. But I think like having a community be very prevalent somewhere is definitely helpful. So the more that people speak out about, hey, I do need this in my restaurants, like I feel like over time we've had a lot of people recently become advocates in this space. So like, especially like the Gen Z, millennial generations, they're speaking up about it, which is really great. And social media has played a really great role in that as well. So that's why we're seeing restaurants pop up with, hey, we do need to educate our staff. But the more that we do that, I think the more awareness we'll cultivate over time. So we're like getting there, but there's definitely a pretty huge gap still that needs to have change over time.
And Heather just made a really good point. There's always going to be a level of risk. It's just where the disconnect is in the communication. Okay, so because I have you and Elise on here, but I want to bring Kate, Jen in here on this conversation. And the screen has changed completely, and I'm so excited. So we have Kate Faulkner and Jen Gilhoy from co-founders of Zero Proof Collective. Jennifer Squiglia, did I say that right, Jen? Okay, from RLC Events. Rachel Riggs, who's the general manager of environmental sustainability for Merits. And Courtney Lohman, founder of Coretta Impact. And I think we lost Moly, but Nina's here as a chef as well. But Kate, Jen, and Rachel, I want to get your take on this too, thinking through the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and then Kayla and Elise as well. But the Zero Proof Collective, it's about the safety of this is alcohol, right? Yep. And Jen's new TED Talk, fantastic job, my friend, and incorporating zero proof or non-alcoholic beverages to these menu items, right? I'm not seeing it. And Rachel, I'm sure you could attest to this. I'm not seeing it on catering menus for sure. And how do we incorporate that sense of inclusion as well as safety and sustainability in that not zero proof network or world? Because that was a lot in front. Thank you.
Oh, I hear you. I think it's a fair question. What I have heard, everyone, and I really commend all of you for the work that you've done, but in this category of beverages, non-alcoholic beverages specifically, we're about 10 years behind. So we're back where you were when you started this, or I guess it's been about 15 years that you've been active in it. Anyway, Zero Proof Collective, we're in Minneapolis. Jen and I encourage non-alcoholic beverages, particularly elevated options, to be served everywhere beverages are served. I loved what Alan said earlier. You would think this wouldn't be an issue, but boy, it really is. And then to clarify, we refer to non-alcoholic beverages as NA. And when we refer to elevated NA options, we are referring to a non-alcoholic cocktail that is thoughtfully crafted, beautifully presented, and lower in sugar and calories. And I have a picture here of
you got to move it.
The tray.
There you go.
Right? Right. Simply that it's worthy of paying. I don't want a soda water with a wet citrus. I'll pay $10. I want to be part of the party, but something very elevated. I loved your podcast on July 5th, Freedom and Independence. When I heard you talk about food insecurity, I immediately thought this really does apply to beverage insecurity as well. And there's such a lack of consideration for people who choose not to drink alcohol on occasion or not at all. I mean, 66 million people in our country don't drink alcohol at all, and they just don't go to bars and restaurants. So we need more education. And to answer your earlier question, consumers need to place a value on non-alcoholic beverage options, because the common response is people don't ask for that. Well, nobody's going to make a change unless somebody asks for it. And we need to get consumers to communicate that value by asking for non-alcoholic options, elevated ones, wherever they go. Even if you don't actually consume it, ask the question, what are your non-alcoholic beverage options? And that should begin to pave the way for some intentional pathways for these to be more of a common experience than, like you've found, almost an impossibility.
Just to speak on the inclusivity that we have found, and there is a very deep level of, let's be inclusive until it impacts those brands and those restaurants that have a culture of serving alcohol and giving people the freedom and encouraging that kind of what we call the liquor dens. You can go into this place and feel no shame for drinking as much as you would like. So we run into resistance at a different level when it comes to inclusivity. And those are the barriers that we're facing. And I think also from the impact of looking at the vegan movement and someone ordering a vegan meal and being included in that experience versus alcohol, which is a substance that changes the shared experience. So it's yet another layer of belonging and a culture that we are running into. And Kayla made some great points too about the culture and the staff and training the servers into what it means to actually offer these to people and how grateful they are when they actually see that on the menu. So many stories, but I just wanted to share that briefly on inclusivity.
Well, and it reminds me of a conversation I had at the restaurant show, and one of the bartenders who does non-alcohol added a whole level of non-alcoholic drinks to her thing. And she's like, most people, and I'm going to say this for food allergy people as well, or people with dietary restrictions, is they walk up to the bar, can you make me a club soda with a lime? Like, they're so embarrassed. They don't want people to hear it, right? Or people don't disclose their food allergies because they don't want to be that pain in the rear end. And so that's where, and Nina and Jennifer and Rachel and Courtney, like, chime in here on how do we make that experience, make it welcoming for them to be able to want to do that, to offering it. And I know we do, Jen, you mentioned products. I mean, Rachel and Courtney too, like, we go into a property and it's a certain house. It's either a Coke house or a Pepsi house or a whatever house, right? But fighting those brands to get into some of these options. So And coming from the environmental side of it too, if you can touch on that aspect as well. There wasn't really a question in there, I don't think, but
I touch on it from a culinary aspect since I'm the plant-based chef over 2 decades here, and I'll use the terminology plant-based or vegan in my world kind of interchangeably depending on the audience I'm in front of. But when I say plant-based, I mean vegan. A lot of people that say plant-based, we serve plant-based, don't mean vegan. So even as a vegan over 2 decades, personally myself, I have to really look at the menu and I have to ask the food server questions with regards to what's actually being used. And being a chef, I think I know how to maybe speak to them in a way that, without saying I'm a chef, because I don't like to do that, I'll look at the menu and just see what ingredients are on the menu, first of all. But from the NA, I think it's exciting as, I'm going to say, plant-based chef, because there are so many connections, the herbaceous aspects of it, the spice aspects of it. So I think where we get in touch with culinary experts and bringing this up, not even touching on the fact it doesn't have alcohol, the fact that it's NA, all the benefits that it brings, that I can create a menu and then offer these drinks that are in line, in thread with maybe the ingredients that I'm using. So all of a sudden, as a creative, I'm very interested in offering something, differentiating myself. And at the end of the day, I always tell people what I cook is food first. I happen to be a chef that chooses ingredients that are labeled plant-based. I'm labeled a vegan chef. I'm labeled a female chef. I'm labeled a female Black chef. I mean, it goes on and on. So I really try to stay away from labels. And I have a lexicon that I've worked with and developed over 20 years. And I'm speaking to the youth in my work with food literacy and getting them excited about dehydrated chips that no one can have just one. I mean, I take everything I've ever known, Lay's potato chip. I'm going to borrow your line because kids love color. So we can go across the board. We can take these beverages that are NA into pastry and baking. I mean, my mind just explodes with the ideas that we never focus on the fact that it may not have alcohol, but the benefits it brings. And oh, by the way, there's no alcohol. You don't have to cook with it and burn off the alcohol, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
That's a positive perspective.
Tracy, I'd love to share an experience that I experienced. We took several of our clients out to Canyon Ranch in Tucson, and we had this most amazing experience because the chef started with our cocktail every day. And the one that I was so impressed with is she juiced corn and made margarita out of it. Yes, it was fabulous. It was so good, but it takes that creativity from the chef. I didn't care if it was non-alcoholic or not. It was just such a great experience. And it was taking every part of the corn and using that so it's environmentally sustainable, and just using natural herbs to decorate the glass. I mean, it was just the experience, like Kate, you were talking about, and it was amazing. And I think after, we had clients there, and some of them were like, "Oh, I could use a glass of wine." But day 2, everybody's like, "What fancy drink are we gonna get now?" And it was awesome. So nobody really cared at that point. It was just really an experience, and I think that's where we need to take this and run with it, because just because you don't want to drink alcohol, I look at it and I do drink alcohol, but I look at it from a well-being perspective. I don't want much more sugar. As I get older, I have to cut down on certain calories, like we all do, and you're just kind of very conscious of that. So I think it's really important to take that experience into play.
Right.
And to jump in terms of inclusivity too, non-alcoholic beverages provide so many options for the food allergy community, because obviously labeling laws are different for alcohol, because the food in the FDA, which regulates all of packaged food, doesn't regulate alcohol. And so it creates a whole new set of hurdles for people with food allergies to drink, because what's in that drink? I don't know. And a lot of the top 9 major allergens are found in common alcohol. So Kayla, it looked like you were going to jump in too, but I know that as someone with food allergies, this movement is something that's really fascinating and presents a lot of opportunities for me to still be included and for the food allergy world to be included, while reserving a level of safety And
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just going to jump in because I love what Kate was saying about like consumers really do need to ask for it, because I have talked to restaurants that have tried to offer non-alcoholic beverages and they end up taking it off their menu because not enough people are ordering it and it's not economically like good for them. So I think, and this pairs with food allergies as well when it comes to offering dishes. If you're going to implement an allergy menu, if you're going to train your staff, if you're going to offer non-alcoholic beverages, it's not just enough to put it on there and then make a consumer search for it. And I feel like that is what a lot of people are doing right now. And so if you're going to put in the effort to create these resources, make it available, be transparent about what you do. And so that's what I do a lot with my company is like, hey, you're already doing these really great things, but nobody knows about it because it's not on your website. Your servers aren't talking about it. Nobody's pointing it out on the menu. It's hidden at the bottom. And because when you have food allergies, or if you're somebody who doesn't drink alcohol, you're used to the latter, you aren't going to look for those things because you don't know that they're accessible because they're not accessible in most places. And so I think that's really the key here is a lot of people are trying to offer these things and the industry is really trying to do right by these communities and be more accessible. But if it's not done in a way that like shows people that it's available to them, then nobody's going to ask for it and they're going to be forced to have to take it off because it's not good for business. So
we discovered that very early on in this process that it's up to the front line to be connected. They have got to be the ones who understand it and they connect. If they've been there a while, they know because their customers have asked them and they've done some special things. But this is the economic sustainability of this. You're absolutely right. People are taking it off the menu because they're not promoting it and talking about it. And people don't know it's available, the education piece. And once they do consume it, some of the restaurants I work with are selling hundreds of these a week at $11 or $12 a pop, and they're beautiful.
Yeah.
So there is a place for it, but it's just not going to continue. The other factor is de-alcoholized beautiful wine and de-alcoholized beer. Let's liken that process to decaffeinated coffee. It's an extra step. It's actually beer and wine when it starts. So it's going to be a couple dollars more expensive. So again, assigning a value to it to say, thank you. I can drink a beautiful glass of wine, but I also remove more than half of the calories and the sugar at the same time. But I can stay in the game and enjoy the party. Right. So I want to tie something that all of you just kind of said into Moly, Courtney, and Rachel's expertise in sustainability here. Is a lot of it's hidden, right? Hotels are not promoting what they're doing. It's behind the scenes. So planners don't know that about the accessibility of that. But I think all of the food allergy, the alcohol, but even the messaging and how we do this is hidden and we're at 103. So if anybody's got to jump off, but I love the conversation continuing to go if you can. But Courtney, Rachel, and Moly, how do we bring all of this together in that sustainability realm?
Sustainability obviously has been around for a while in the events industry, but it's never been the forefront. And now with what's happening in the world and everybody sees everything every day, it's just is right here all the time, right? And I think there's a lot that's catching up, but there's more to be caught up, right? So I think that when we're talking to various customers and various properties, we see that momentum is building, and that's exciting, but it needs to go at a faster pace, in my opinion.
Well, and Moly, go ahead.
No, it's because for me, we have a ton of sites, right? And somebody from the site will call and go, hey, my client just asked me, not necessarily an event client, but the client that they're in the venue that they're in. My client just asked me what we're doing from a sustainability perspective, and I was hoping you could help me out. My first reaction to them is, well, you're in the venue. So if you want me to ask you a few questions, I'm happy to do so. And so once I start asking them questions, they're like, oh, yeah, we do that. Yeah, we do that. Yeah. Okay, well, do you track that? Yeah, I've got a list right now. Okay, well, that's what they're asking for. And so I think it's the education piece, because sustainability was just this word that like nobody knew what it was, right? It's just out there. we sustain something. We keep our garage clean. We've sustained it, right? So like, I think people are just using it in the wrong capacity. And so once I finish the call with them, they're like, oh, we're doing all kinds of stuff. Then of course they want me to get into a graphic artist to make it look pretty. But the point being is that it's already there. And I think they're just unaware. And so the more planners can ask for it as well, the better it is for them to recognize that, hey, we actually are doing it. So I think they feel subpar. They're not maybe in a LEED building, or they're not in a building that's getting some kind of has a grass roof or has some other kind of cool thing that has gotten all the press. When they're doing the right thing, they've been recycling used cooking oil since it was created, right? There's been something happening with recycling cooking oil since it happened. So I think it's just a matter of getting the messaging out and making those, again, training those, what we talked about from the very beginning all the way through to the end, and helping them understand. That's what I do when I try to go on site. Hey, show me the loading dock. And then I'll see that they've got compactors for these different streams. Well, you're already doing it.
Exactly.
Or making them aware of it.
And I find that in a lot of situations where they're proud of what they do, but they're not boastful about it, right? And that really is imperative to the planner, because the planner just doesn't know. I've sat in a planner shoes before, not at a third party, but as a corporate meeting director, and I relied on my venues to really educate me. And if they didn't tell me, I didn't know. And so
we had that with one of our Canadian, and it's really funny because it goes right to what you're saying. So the vice president of sales for the venue itself, we were trying to get her to let us do some additional things. And I said, we really want to market what's happening within the venue, not just what we're doing, but what the venue's doing, try to help out what you're doing. She said, we're Canadian. It's like breathing for us. We don't need to tell people that. Yeah,
exactly. I represented Vancouver for 16 years selling into...
And that's the city I'm talking about.
Well, it was exactly it was just a natural...
It's like breathing. And when she said that, I was like, okay, but people need to see you're breathing. Otherwise, you're a statue. So,
and that was exactly the point is you come to Vancouver, you're going to act sustainably by just choosing that destination. People are like, what does that mean? So we went through this process of breaking that down, especially when the convention center the new building came online, because it's the first LEED Platinum, double LEED Platinum.
Platinum. That's our building.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Right. And so I think that's part of the challenge. And another example of this, Molly and Tracy, is that I have been going out in my rural merits and talking at conferences. And I went to a couple of different conferences and I asked them the basics on sustainability. Do you know what Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions are? Do you know what CDP and EcoVadis is? And those things, if you're in a sustainability role, that is what you're tracking to and you're looking at and what you're having to do. But that's not mainstream language. So I think we need to take the language 101 class. It's not a foreign language. It's going to be new language that we're seeing in the event world. And we need to educate on that and the practices. We just worked on, there's a group out of the UK called ICE Hub, and it's all worldwide corporate meeting professionals at the VP and above level. And we work with them and the EIC to create an Action 10 list. And that Action 10 list is looking at 10 various areas within an event process or an event area or 8 phases or 10 phases of an event. Long story. And we give good, better, and best tips on how to activate that in a meeting. And I can drop that into the chat for you, but it's just how to do it. We've talked about it. Now we're talking about how to do it. And the why is really important too. And that's where Molly and myself and counting the carbon emissions of Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3, that is at the more advanced level. But the point is that education is key. And we need to keep driving that education home.
I think I can jump in. Education is key and communication is key. Buy-in is really key. And buy-in by those that have the power to make all this happen. And then you take the scale of all the people that have to have buy-in. And then when you talk about communication and education, where are these materials accessible for the people we need to communicate and educate? Because the younger youth, or those that I don't like to call names of generations even, because that's another label I try to stay away from, but are they on their phone? Is this material on the phone? Where are they able to access this? And then what is the accountability and the time frame of which everyone needs to know about this? In the cafe, we have meetings every day, just powwows. So we know how everybody's checking in. How are you feeling today? What's your mental health, first of all, so that you can come to work and do your job. And those are the things that I think when I hear communication and education, buy-in is so key. Who needs to be bought in on this and who needs to be kept aware of what we're doing, maybe the changes we have to make, and creating, like you said, lexicons and the language that's easy for me to share with my team and for my team to share with whoever the event planner is or the guest that's coming in. It can be seamlessly done, but everybody has to be, I'm going to say, on the same plate, not page.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah.
I love that too. One of the things I want to say, Trace, is the EIC is doing a lot of work on education.
And that's the Events Industry Council for people who don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. The Events Industry Council is doing a lot around education and certification. They have certification of events and the sustainability practices of an event. You can get a badge, your gold, silver, bronze, whatever. And they have foundations. But it's a beautiful certification program, and it's a way to start your journey. The other group that's out there is the Net Zero Carbon Events Pledge, and a lot of people are making commitments to that pledge. But that is our advocacy armed in the events industry, going to the COP28 of the UN Sustainable Conference, Climate Change Conference. And they're out there advocating for our industry, because if we don't step up and say all the great things we were doing, like in around sustainability, environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and governance, the ESGs of the world, we don't stand up for our industry and share those stories, we could get regulated. We could get taxed. We could, because they see what's happening with the event industry and the impact it makes on air travel, food waste, things like that. And so I think it's really important for your listeners to understand there are groups out there that they can get involved in and that they can be a part of to help advance the industry of this nature.
There's so much to wrap around all of this stuff. And I think, you've got Kate on here with Zero Proof, and you've got Carolyn and Aaron on here who are fighting for food allergy awareness, and Nina, who is James Beard, White House chef, whatever that, we'll talk about that on your episode in August. But and then Moly fighting sustainability wise, it's all tied, and the theme for next month is civility. Right. And I think it's all tied to civility as well. And civility for the earth, civility for humans and for businesses. But I think Aaron and Carolyn, we can learn from what Rachel just said is like, let's go fight the UN for these things. Right. And because this is part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, it's the health and safety of humans is part of that. So we need to be taking it to that net level. And I know that WHO is involved in some of this, but Kate as well is like, let's look at what are options at the COP, whatever number we're on, right? 28.
I just want to jump, Tracy, I want to jump in there when you say that, because the World Health Organization has an actual plan to reduce alcohol consumption in our world by 2030.
Oh, wow.
Okay. It's on the website. So this is a much bigger issue. We're just early on in it. It's funny, I decided today, and maybe you all can understand this, we think everyone knows what we know. And one of the most powerful things that makes us think that way is when we search for something on our phone, the algorithm then throws a whole bunch of stuff at us that is related. So we think other people have all this information and they don't even know some of the words that we've talked about today.
Right, exactly.
That's right. A much bigger situation, the non-alcoholic beverage issue.
Right. Okay. So, all right, closing thoughts on all of this. So, Moly, I'm going to start with you from the back. You've been here since the very beginning of this hour and 15 minutes. What closing thoughts do you have for this 200th episode of Eating at a Meeting?
Wow. Togetherness, education, collaboration, open lines of communication, awareness. So those are the words that I came away with, and just sharing our stories. And again, what Kate just said, not taking it for granted that people know what we're talking about, because they don't necessarily. And I think that's to me, that's some of the fun part, right? Is actually educating people, because you can see like they get so excited and they think about their own lives and what's happening in their own lives and their friends and what they've done and how they can maybe make a difference. Even if it's one small change, just by something you shared with somebody, it's going to make a difference. So that's what I take away from today and your 200 episodes.
Oh, thank you. And I get frustrated all the time too, because I'm like, why don't you know this? And I'm like, but it's exactly what Kate said. So what about you, Erin?
I have a lot of thoughts. Building on what Molly said was, I think sharing stories is critical, and I applaud you for giving us a place to do that. So thank you again. Seriously, this has been an incredible hour, but episode after episode for 200 episodes has been incredible. They've all been so interesting, and I tuned into a lot of what all of you say over the course of this episode and others. So thank you for your insight. Communication is key. So not just sharing stories, but sharing and educating as well. And I do echo, all of us are not good representatives of the average consumer and the average client and the average patient. So it's important that we have patience as we bring people up to speed and we bring awareness to everything. And I think there's an interconnectivity to a lot of what we've said here about sustainability and health. So it's circling back to the top of the hour with food allergy talk. Sustainability plays a big role in why we are where we are with food allergy, where we're at a growing problem with prevalence and other health conditions as well. These are all very interconnected issues that we need to be playing a role in each other's lives and helping move the conversation forward. So I just encourage everyone to continue sharing their stories and continue. And then inclusivity, the top word I would want to use when we talk about anything having to do with food and gathering is inclusivity, make a seat at the table. So that's sort of my thoughts on things. But this has been an incredible hour and change of conversation.
Thanks, Erin. Carolyn?
Well, congratulations, Tracy, on the 200th episode. That's amazing. Obviously, you're aware of what we're doing here, and everyone talked about communication and training and sharing. And one of the things that Jackie and I are doing at the moment is the near-miss reporting campaign. When it goes wrong, why did it go wrong? How can we make sure it doesn't go wrong again? And how do we prevent a fatality? We know from Natasha Edna Paris and Moly that they were warned by about 6 or 7 families that there was an issue with that labelling. But at the time, Pret-a-Manger didn't have a system in place to do near-miss reporting unless it was an incident. If they had, it might have made a bit of a difference to where we are now today, and it may have saved a life. But we need to think about sharing it when it goes wrong so that we can learn, communicate and training, and that's all part of it. So, yeah, we've got the report due out early September. I'm going to share it with you, Tracy, anyway, before then, because we're looking for people to support it. In the UK, what we want to try and see done is the Food Standard Agency adding a section to our, we call it the SFB, the Safer Food, Better Business. It's a thing that can be downloaded. There's a lot of forms and stuff that small businesses can use. But obviously other food management systems, we're talking to other larger companies. They already do the near-miss reporting. They include it, and trying to encourage businesses to learn and communicate. And us as a business, it's not about naming and shaming and naming and blaming. It's about what we can learn from somebody else's mistake and make sure we don't cause a fatality. And we still have a long way to go here in the UK. But communication and training for us is key. It's what we include on all our training and how we sort of move forward. So, yes, thank you for letting me join today, Tracy.
You're welcome. And it reminds me, Sarah Blakely used to, when I've heard her speak multiple times before, founder of Spank, her dad used to come home. Every day she'd come home from school and her dad said, "What did you fail at?" And he's like, "Because you learn from your failures." And I heard her speak like 20 years ago. So, I mean, the fact that I still think about that story, and not that we want somebody to die, or that we missed throwing that food, saving that food, but how do we take what we missed and incorporate it into doing back better the next time?
I worked for Pratt & Whitney for a little while, which is the aircraft and engines. They have an amazing quality system. At the time, it's like, oh my goodness, what am I doing here? But now I step back and I think, actually, that's there. They take people's lives into their hands every day. We do that as caterers. We take people's lives into our hands. We need to make sure it's safe. We need to have a good quality system to make sure that we prevent anything from happening. We just cannot afford to go wrong. So, yeah, definitely.
Nina, do you have any closing remarks?
Yes, thank you, Tracy, for having me here with the rest of your panelists. The thing I take away, and knowing you for the time that I have, you are clearly the role model and proof that after 200 episodes, consistency matters. And things don't change overnight. Over 2 decades of being a plant-based vegan chef, I know that it's hard for people to change their mindset, their environment. So consistency, we can't give up. Inclusivity is big for me. Diversity is big for me. And listening is huge for me.
I love that.
So thank you.
You're welcome. Rachel?
Thank you, Tracy, and congratulations. I'm really excited for you. I remember when this all started. For me, it just validates the thinking that well-being and sustainability are so intricately connected, because in order to have a happy, healthy person and have a happy, healthy world, we have to take care of one of each other. I can't talk today. And we have to really be in tune with how we listen to other folks and listen to their needs and listen to what makes them be that most productive that they can be. And you have to listen to your audience, like all these folks have said. And I think it's really important to listen, understand, seek a lot of questions, and go directly to the experts, because the experts are accessible now.
Yeah. And it's, thank you. The asking a question is nothing to be shamed about. I mean, the question is stupid, and somebody's going to learn something from something. So, all right, Kate.
Okay, so I loved what Nina said. She brought in the buy-in. That's just huge. And that is so hard to accomplish. And I'm going to have to personally pray for civility as I move forward. Sometimes I find myself hanging on the table. I promise this will work. Oh my goodness, it really does get emotional. And the second word is I'm grateful. I'm really grateful to be able to work in an area that I'm passionate about. I'm really grateful to be meeting other people like you who are doing the same thing, all of you. And I'm grateful to you, Tracy, because for all the work that you continue to do in dealing with all the challenges that you have faced and overcoming them and getting to this place of 200 is really a remarkable accomplishment. So as we say, we'll do a little NA cheers to 201 and beyond.
Yes, ma'am. I'm all for that. Yes. Thank you, ladies, and Alan and Dave, who were our male participants today. I mean, I really appreciate everybody who listened in today and will listen in the future. It's a very important conversation. Food connects us. Eating at a meeting connects us. And as Erin and Rachel said, everything is interconnected. And I posted something about the farm bill today. That's interconnected to all of this as well. And whether you plan a meeting for 5 people or you plan a meeting for 17,000, eating at a meeting is an important part to bring safety, sustainability, and inclusion to the table. So thank you all for being my guests today and in the past and in the future. Miss Nina is coming up next month. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So next week is the last Wednesday of July. It is also, ironically, on Wednesday, the anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so I have a lawyer coming on next week to talk about the ADA and what that means, and especially around food and beverage and food allergies, celiac disease, et cetera. So I'm really excited to bring that up to you. And next month, again, I mentioned it was all about civility, and we're going to talk about what that means to be nice to people and the planet. So until next time, stay safe and eat well. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.